Welcome to our IES expert discussion on climate change. Today, we'll be discussing recently released reports from the IPCC and the latest developments on climate change over the 6 months since COP26. During that time, the IES has been working to scrutinize the implementation of commitments and to raise ambition for science-led climate solutions. In March, we published a gap analysis on the current commitments made by the UK and whether or not they're likely to achieve transformative change. Now we're bringing together environmental professionals with relevant expertise through discussion events like this one. Our goal is to raise ambitions and to bring together voices from across the environmental sciences to achieve transformative change. That work has been steered by the IES's climate action community, IES members who have come together to share their expertise and lead our activities. The subject matter of this discussion today is focused on our reactions to the latest IPCC reports. So casting our minds back to February, Working Group 2 released its report on impacts, adaptation and vulnerability. And then in April, Working Group 3 released its report on the mitigation of climate change. Coupled with last year's report from Working Group 1 on the physical science basis underpinning climate change, we now have a sizable body of background evidence which will form the basis of the 6th assessment cycle's synthesis report later in the year. So is it big news or no big surprises? We'll start off by bringing in each panelist to introduce themselves and let us know a little bit about their background. And then we'll go back down the line to get those first reactions on the IPCC's reports. So let's start with Dr. Mark Pawlett from Cranfield University. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Joseph. So as Joseph said, I'm Dr. Mark Pawlett at Cranfield University. So my specialism is soil and in particular the microbiology or the biological components of the soil. So I'm interested in how it functions and how we can utilize knowledge of those functions for our benefits, such as carbon sequestration, ecosystem services, and how we can benefit the humans, but while also maintaining and also improving the environment for the natural systems.
Thank you, Mark. And I'll look forward to hearing a little bit more from you as we get into some of those crucial conversations around those critical interactions with soil later on in the discussion. But next, we'll introduce Andrew Frost from Thompson Environmental Consultants. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning. Thank you, Joseph. Yes, Andrew Frost, Thompson Environmental Consultants. I'm Associate Director there for Climate Change and Sustainability, environmental scientist and hydrologist by background, and quite keen to make sure that we focus on the broad range of environmental impacts, including climate change, as well as the other impacts we should be considering, so we make sure we don't have unintended consequences and more and bigger problems in the next 10 to 25 years.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. It's great to have you here, and it'll be really interesting to get that consultancy perspective on some of the evidence and the kinds of change we're expecting to see. But before we do, let's introduce our final panelist, Hayley Warrens from Transport for Wales. Hayley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Hayley Warrens. I'm the Climate Change Manager at Transport for Wales. I lead their climate change team, so trying to ensure that Welsh climate change policy and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is embedded in terms of what we're doing to address the climate emergency. I'm an environmental scientist and geographer by trade, and very much look forward to being part of this discussion.
Thank you, Hayley. And yes, that breadth of experience across resilience, across risk, some of these big issues is going to be really important as we get stuck into some of these discussions around the IPCC reports. So let's hop straight into that discussion, and I'll throw it right back to you, Hayley, for your reactions to those reports. What do you think are the most important messages coming out of those, and what are your reactions?
I would say there was 3 key points that were made by the IPCC that really stood out to me. One of them was the fact that the 2019 was the warmest year than any other year in the 2 million year record that we have. The last 4 decades were the warmest on history. And it is pretty unequivocal that humans are the leading cause for climate change. So they were the 3 main points that really stood out. When you actually sort of look at those 3 points in the round, you can make the linkages and really start to draw your focus on the fact that we need to do something. It is us, that we are definitely causing climate change. But I think that the worrying aspects of those reports are the fact that sea levels are changing. The Arctic sea ice is shrinking, and these impacts are being felt across the world. So whereas before, I think with previous IPCC reports, there were, I suppose, thoughts that this could be happening. It is now that the language is quite alarming in that it is highly likely, and it is most likely certain that these occurrences are happening and will continue to do so unless we actually do something about it. I think what is also worrying is the impact on our biodiversity and our ecosystems as well. We are starting to see the intrinsic links between our climate system and our ecosystems in the fact that they are starting to suffer. We've got huge amount of species which are shifting polewards because effectively where they're cold loving species, so their climates where they're actually living at the moment and their habitats are warming up, so they're starting to migrate to try and get to those colder temperatures. And I think we've seen instances of that actually happen in Scotland, where some sort of, I can't remember the exact species, it was a species of rabbit that particularly like to live in cold regions, and now up in the Cairngorms the ice caps are shrinking there, and that they're feeling particularly exposed because they're camouflaged to blend in with the snow, and there's no snow to blend in with. So when you actually start to unpick all this, we realize actually how alarming these reports are actually trying to show that what is happening across the world is definitely a code red situation. The report that came out last summer, which was looking at climate risk, was deemed as code red, and this was just ahead of COP26. Now, you would have thought that that would have been enough to actually do something and pledge some more commitments, which would perhaps be more ambitious. And what we did see, unfortunately, is the net zero target for India was pledged at 2070. China's is a bit lackluster. I just don't think we actually got enough out of it and enough urgency when the writing's on the wall here. We need to do something about it, and we need to do something about it soon. Otherwise, it's effectively going to be too late.
Thanks, Hayley. Big message there on urgency, and I think you're absolutely right. So much to unpick from these reports. So let's do a little bit more unpicking. Andy, what are your takeaways from those reports?
I think it's. I would agree with all the comments from Hayley. I think the message is absolutely clear. It's crunch time. If not already, we got to that point where, you know, exceeding 1.5 in the next 2 decades is looking exceptionally likely. We're hopeful if we actually do manage to hit the reductions which are in line with the 2030 target, we should see that overshoot actually being contained to a degree. I think the most alarming point for me was the change will happen. We can have the argument of as to, you know, natural climate change scenarios and the natural climate change events that will happen, and also that, you know, how much of it is down to human nature, human activity. It's absolutely clear, you know, it is stating that it is down to, you know, anthropogenic humans' activities. And I think the other key thing for me is there's still this decoupling between policy and commitments. We're seeing people saying things, but with on one side, but we're not seeing action on the other. There's definitely a case at times of the left hand and the right hand not communicating too clearly. I think worryingly is the impact of the climate risks and changes that we're going to actually see and are seeing now. Unfortunately, it will impact on some of the lower income developing nations and countries where they can't afford to carry out some of the mitigations that are required, and also are most at risk with regards to the impacts which will be happening to them with regards to sea level changes, increasing flooding, increase in storm severity. It's very sobering, and hopefully a wake-up call to many. However, it always strikes me as amazing that we'd still rather have rather inconsequential elements at the top of our news feeds, rather than this most startling and concerning for all. I sometimes feel I live in Groundhog Day, that how much more evidence do we need before we start changing behaviours, changing our policies, and fully integrating those policies that aren't changed by political will and whim each time the incumbent in Parliament changes. So worrying, but also positive that we can still act and do something. But it is clear that action has to be now, and it has to be at macro and micro level, from governments and multinational agreements right the way down to individual activities and decisions and choices in behaviours and the options that we choose to adopt.
Absolutely, Andy. All sorts of action there that we'll maybe start to talk through a little bit more as the conversation goes on. But first, I want to go to you, Mark. I want to hear what your takeaways from the reports were, whether they were similar, whether they were different. I'm interested on your perspective.
Thank you, Joseph. Similar, of course, similar, but from a soil science perspective, of course, you can. I'm bound to say there's not enough soils there. I'm going to say that because I'm a soil scientist. But of course, if you consider that there's something like 2 to 3 times more carbon in the soils than in the atmosphere, it's important. It's important for biogeochemical cycling. It's important for carbon sequestration into our land management policy. Policies in terms of things like peat extraction, uses of peats. That's a big carbon resource for us, which we're destroying on a global scale. The encroachments of deserts, the flooding, lots of effects on a global scale that are affecting our soils, which of course will affect our ability to deliver food for a growing population. And also critically, it's not just about carbon, it's about biodiversity. So we know that the land is being degraded, and so we need to restore it. And this has to be a part of the climate change picture. At the moment, it's not in there enough. If we think about the things that Hayley was saying in terms of migration of species, of course, we've got migration of pathogens as well. Pathogens will be moving, so pathogens will be affecting crops and humans in a way that we haven't even thought of. Things like mycotoxins that's evolving through pathogens, they will be starting to take effect on humans in ways that we haven't thought of as well. So yeah, I agree with everything that Hayley and Andrew were saying, but definitely from a soil perspective, I'd push soils into the front more so than it is really at the moment with government policy.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Mark. And it's so often, I think we forget these very important buffering systems, these natural systems which help to some extent protect us against a degree of risk, but also which perform so many really important roles for the natural environment, but also for us as human beings as well. And I suppose the question then we have at this point, and it's not just a question for soil, it's a question for all of the issues we're seeing coming out of these reports, is what we need to do now. It's been 6 months, more or less, since COP26, when all the big promises were made and all of the work supposedly began. And we've got 6 months now, more or less again, maybe slightly less at this point, until we're hitting COP27 in Egypt, where the next level of discussions are going to be taking place. So we've got this neat period of time. I suppose the next question is, what do we need to be doing with it? What should governments be doing? What actions should we be seeing coming out of government over the next 6 months? Andy, maybe we'll start with you, because I think you seemed to have your set of asks for government at the end there. So maybe we'll start with you and see what you think, and then see who else wants to hop in.
Well, I think it's clear that there needs to be more action. 6 months isn't very far away from us at all. I'd say at the moment we're probably not on our flight path. We're not achieving what we need to achieve. as I say, my biggest concern always with policy, we see that, noise moving in the right direction, with the commentary moving in the right direction. But sometimes, how does that actually stick? My biggest concern, yes, we see bills coming in, we see laws being passed, but actually then the mechanism to ensure that they happen and continue, sometimes we remove. I think the most frustrating I've had recently was when the Code for Sustainable Homes, for example, was scrapped, which gave us a pathway towards net zero carbon for our built environment and reducing our emissions, and taken away from being mandatory to being made voluntary. It's those changes that we see that are concerning, and I think the situation, the terrible situation we're faced with Ukraine, is again highlighted with regards to our fuel scarcity and also our resilience with regards to security of our fuel supplies. That there will always be times when we have to consider other activities, like ensuring we can keep the lights on and keep people warm. Again, it highlights the challenges that the government and policymakers actually face. And it's not necessarily a distraction, but it highlights that we still need to consider all of these things. We need to consider the conflict, the security, the scarcity, but just dashing to revert back to fracking or to go for more fossil fuels, considering the situation we're in, we've got to take a balanced approach to it. We've got to consider more than just the economic side of things. We need to really consider the triple bottom line. I think the next 6 months are key, but I think unfortunately, we will get to that point where we won't quite achieve our flight path in achieving what we set out to achieve at COP26.
Well, that's it's maybe worrying news given the urgency of some of the things that we've said we need to achieve. Hayley, do you want to come in on that at all? Any takes on that? Any different priorities you think from the government for the next 6 months?
Yeah, I agree that there needs to be more urgent action. Absolutely. I think at the scale at the moment that the government seems to be mitigating in line with their net zero agenda, for me, just isn't urgent enough. And there does seem to be quite a capital growth ethos about their strategies, whereas I think it needs to be framed actually that we need to do it because of the existential threat that climate change poses, rather than trying to make money out of it. I think with the government, seeing as we've got an energy crisis at the moment, really does need to be tackling our leaky homes as a priority. Insulate Britain have, really tried to put this issue to the forefront, and sadly received a lot of media flack for their protests. But this is a grave issue. We've got hundreds of thousands of leaky homes in the UK, and yet all the government want to do is continue to build new homes which aren't even up to scratch. And I think what needs to be a priority is actually trying to fix the homes through energy efficiency measures that we've got. Simple measures such as loft insulation can reduce 1/3 of energy loss from a home, which is massive. And I think, seeing as we've got so many people that are really suffering from the energy crisis and likely to be exacerbated or pushed into fuel poverty, this is a really effective measure, not just to address the energy crisis, but also to try and reduce the vast proportion of our country's emissions which are lost through residential heating. I also think that we need to be focusing on resilience. There is a need to accept that our climate is going to change regardless of what we do to reduce emissions. And that is because of the complex way in which carbon, in particular carbon dioxide, works in the atmosphere. It has an atmospheric lifetime of 100 years. So we could reduce emissions to near zero now, but we're still going to be playing catch up with what we've done in the past. So our climate is going to change, and that is going to bring about worsening weather, particularly those extreme events. The storms that we had a few weeks ago, I had a 3-day power cut, and I've got an EV and I couldn't charge it. So what we need to be addressing is, right, how do we ensure that we are prepared for those events? We can do all that we can do to try and reduce our emissions, but we still need to be prepared for that likelihood. That being said, I think we need to be addressing the national grid through large-scale decarbonisation. We're obviously looking at installing, as a country, we are quite fortunate in that we do have large scale renewables, but I think we need to be up in the ante, especially as electrification seems to be the main direction that we seem to be taking in terms of reducing emissions from not just transportation, but also the way that we heat our homes and cook as well. So I think we need to be not just addressing tailpipe emissions, as it were, we need to be tracking back to source. So there's a lot that the government need to do. And, you know, to be candid, I just wish that they would hurry up and get on with it.
Fair enough, absolutely. I think a sentiment we probably all share to some extent. There's a lot to come back on there. I think we'll definitely come back to the question of resilience a little bit later. I think a very important conversation we'll want to have. But also the idea of misprioritization of issues perhaps by the government. And as Andy said, maybe in some cases even regression on commitments that have been made in the past is a real shame and something that definitely needs to be addressed. But before we do move on, I do want to come to you, Mark, on maybe a slightly more specific question. The question I'd have for you is about soil, of course, and about what it needs in the next 6 months, what we need to see if we're going to get soil into the place that it's going to not only, like you say, help with carbon sequestration, but do all of those other things that we know it needs to do to help us respond to environmental crises.
Thanks for that, Joseph. Of course, in soils, things take a long time. Once the soil has been damaged, then to restore it does take a while, and it takes good management strategies and intervention. And often the strategies do have to come from the government in terms of policy. So there's the example in terms of, I've already mentioned peats, but the idea that we're going to stop peats in compost will be they're being phased out. Why they're being phased out? Why don't we just stop selling them on a commercial scale? So they're being phased out from garden centres, but commercially, as I believe it, and then you can still sell them on a commercial basis. So the question is why? It's preserving the carbon in the soils as it is. So it's farming policy. A farmer needs to money. They need to put food on the table at the end of the day. They need help in terms of preserving the carbon in their soils. It's the trade-off, one of the trade-offs between pushing our soils to get the food that we want, but also in terms of carbon sequestration and biodiversity. There's always going to be trade-offs there. So, of course, if the farmer is going to have a reduced income, they need some kind of assistance from the government. So some of these things can be short-term in terms of the government-led strategies and policies, and where we're going to reduce the uses of peats within the commercial market, but putting carbon back in the soil and restoring resilient ecosystems does take time and understanding.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it's really critical that we maintain that environmental science expertise in these decisions. But I think perhaps the even more pertinent point you made was about trade-offs. And I think we've got this really big question in front of us, which is, where are we going to need to be making these trade-offs between environmental and social needs? And how can we facilitate an approach which gives us co-benefits, including our ability to address other environmental challenges, such as biodiversity loss, air pollution, all of these big issues? Massive question. Does anybody want to volunteer themselves to try and give us an answer?
So what can you do on the land to improve carbon and resilience and biodiversity? So, for example, in there's the concept of rewilding. Rewilding, well, it's often not as rewilded as in the UK as it is and some others in Europe or globally, but it's kind of it is a managed strategy. But nonetheless, you're reducing food. You're reducing the amount of food that goes to society. But if you rewild the fens, for example, then we won't be able to grow some of the high value crops that we have in the fenlands. But then we'll have a massive increase of carbon as the peat restores, and also we have increase in biodiversity and flood mitigation. But that's the trade-off, is that we won't have food in the fenlands. But are we growing the wrong crops in the wrong places? If we're trying to push our soils in the UK or even in other parts of the world to grow crops, because everybody wants wheat and barley, and it's are we growing the wrong crops in the wrong places? Regenerative agriculture is another thing, trying to improve the soil health through regenerative agriculture and providing support for the farmer to do these sorts of things to improve carbon and that carbon source, so the carbon sink, you know, and so to hold the carbon in the soils, but these things take time. It's all about time in the soil, but we don't have that time. So as we already discussed, we need to take action now. I think those sorts of land management strategies, sort of rewilding, regenerative agriculture, improve resilience in the systems, but there's the trade-off of food.
I think we had volunteers across the board on this. So does anybody else want to hop in on that?
I was going to suggest, actually, it's not so directly linked to what Mark was saying, but I think one of the main trade-offs that we need to probably face is people's convenience if we're going to address the climate emergency. For instance, through accessibility, if we're to address air quality issues in some of our cities, particularly those that we know are sort of prone to exceeding those sort of safe limits for NOx and particulate matter, then what we need to do is perhaps implement draconian measures to try and improve air quality in those areas that will directly impact upon people's mobility and ability to be able to access places such as city centres. I think freedom of choice may be restricted as well, and this actually has synergy with what Mark was saying about our food systems. So our freedom of choice might have to be limited to some degree if we're to try and reduce agricultural emissions, whilst also trying to look at addressing other ecological impacts, such as the nitrate and phosphate issues that some of our water ecosystems are facing, not just as a result of agriculture, but as a result of the sort of large scale building that we have. And then linked to that, I think housing shortages are possibly something that we might face, as we need to try and address the impact that our large-scale housing, house building in the UK is actually having on our ecosystems and our biodiversity. For instance, in the area that I live in, Somerset, huge quantities of greenfield land are being built on to build, you know, quite substantial housing development, and that in turn is having a knock-on effect on biodiversity. For instance, I was talking to a friend of my mum's, and she was saying that there was a sort of new housing estate that was being built on the edge of the town on former woodland and greenfields, and the pheasants she's found in her garden, she's never had pheasants before, but it's because those particular habitats are being pushed out and their habitats have been removed. So I think there will be a need to actually look at whether or not we need to build the quantity of housing that we are at the moment, not just to address the biodiversity crisis, but also those embodied emissions in construction as well. And lastly, I was just going to say about energy consumption. This is something that does need to be addressed with urgency, not to address climate change, but also linked with the energy crisis. We could potentially see fuel poverty and being colder in the winter as a trade-off to try and address those issues.
Really, really interesting. I think it's interesting, Hayley, that you say that your perspective is so different from ours, because actually I think there's a lot of similarities in both the issues, because we've got these two very different kinds of trade-offs. We've got the top level economic trade-offs, land use, big questions. And then we've got those at times very personal social trade-offs for individuals as of consumer choice. But the answer to both ends up being quite similar, which is that if we don't make a social trade-off now, if we don't make tough decisions about what we need to do, we're going to be facing even tougher decisions in the future. And the answer is to try and, like you say, Mark, we can find some of those co-benefits when we can. We can find things which give us a bit of both in a way that's going to be positive. And that can help mitigate that situation. But regardless, if we want to avoid something perhaps a bit more restrictive down the line, we need to, like you say, act with a bit of urgency now. Andy, you came in as well when I offered the question of trade-offs. I'm wondering if you have a third perspective and whether or not we can unite it again into a single one.
I love old adages, and I always say that you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. It's just a case of how big the egg is that you have to crack to make your omelette. I think both Hayley and Mark have highlighted the fact that there does need to be trade-offs, but in the grand scheme of things, it ultimately comes down to being quite small in compared to the problems that we face. And I don't so much see them as actually trade-offs as opportunities to join the dots. I think behaviours do have to change. We do have to accept that we need to be more restricted. I still can't understand why we need vehicles that do 140 miles an hour or 160 miles an hour or accelerate 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. I'd rather it did 70 and had a battery that took me 600-700 miles. But it's the benefits of what we do which are greater than the inconveniences we face of having to change business as usual and take some of our freedom of choice away from us. And I'll touch on the points that Mark raised, certainly around that habitat change that's required. If you think that how we can join the dots from actually rewilding an area to help us get biodiversity, to ensure that we've got a healthy gene pool, to help us fight climate change and make it more resilient as we lose species, we want that depth of genetic material to help us deal with pathogens and changes going forward. We rely, I think, 70+% of our food comes from probably 3 main food types. We need more diversity. I remember speaking to someone recently who said we only have one brand of or species of cherry in the UK now, Morello. Well, I was used to have multiple when I was a child growing up in Kent. But that approach, so having that biodiversity, what that gives us with regards to climate change resilience and with regards to flood mitigation, what it gives us with regards to that quality of landscape, the opportunity to use it for amenity, to actually have it resource, to use it for giving people somewhere to go, to get that health and well-being element right, to give people a chance of training in new areas. I think that those benefits far outweigh the fact that we might have to consider growing something that we've grown historically in one location to moving it somewhere else. We touched on the topic of nutrient neutrality, the fact that we're planning to build 300,000 plus houses a year. We're not going to hit those targets. But we're now facing the very real prospect that developers can't build because they've got to come up with this nutrient neutrality challenge that they've got to overcome. And that isn't just the buildings and the phosphates that come from our washing powders and our dishwasher and our washing machines, but also from the runoff and also from the agricultural premises. But again, by using the biodiversity, we can enhance riparian zones around streams and watercourses. When you can change agricultural behaviour, we can move activities from some of the most fragile or risk areas and relocate them. So there's benefits from addressing the biodiversity that we can link then to the nutrients. We can link that biodiversity gain into carbon sequestration. It comes down to that natural capital approach and those nature-based solutions. We need to just learn how to green the grey, to soften our engineering approaches and actually realise that there are sometimes benefits that we can't easily put an economic value to, but they far exceed the cost of doing it and the change that's required to make it happen. So I think that there are trade-offs, but we need to keep up that proportionality and the scale in mind of what's the cost compared to what the ultimate benefit is. Accept that it's not business as usual, but actually take the opportunity to take the trade-offs as a way of seeing the bigger picture and linking those points. I think that from my perspective, one of the key things is there's a big need to educate. I remember as a student at university learning my environmental science, and we had a wonderful module on green economy. How do you value a landscape and then compare it if you put a wind farm there? And I remember saying to Steve Lane at the end of the module, that's fantastic that you're preaching to the converted. You know, do you teach economics at university at Lancaster? Yeah, we do. Do you teach that module in the economics degree? No, we don't. And that's one of the problems. We need to, as I say, it's that greening or you know, we talk about T-shaped people. We need to rapidly accelerate that so people can see that bigger picture and get a scale of the cost that we have to face going forward.
Thank you for that, Andy. And Mark, I think you just wanted to say a quick word.
Yeah, just briefly, I think there's a lot of really interesting points there. I think they're all interlinked. So for me, society has to think out of the box and do things differently. And we've talked about the green belts, and I personally think that they should be preserved and not built on. So we have to think out in terms of our housing policy. We have to think out of the box about many things like this. But what we want, for me, one thing that we do have to be careful of is the large multinational companies, as we say, greenwashing. So they're doing something in one side, they're saying, yeah, we're planting trees, but on the other side, we're flying thousands of air miles, and so we're destroying biodiversity, but it's and using carbon, but actually it's okay because we're doing something somewhere else. But this to me is a dangerous picture. The large companies, I'm not going to say the company's name, but I flew and on the back of the seat says this is a carbon neutral airline company. It's like, yeah, really? So I think these sorts of things we really have to be careful on. Is the idea of greenwashing. I just wanted to put that in there, but I agree with everything everybody else was saying so far.
Absolutely, it's a really important idea that we need to contend with as one of I think the big challenges that we're going to face, not just these 6 months ahead of us, but the 6 we've already had and everything else, is this question of, are we actually getting the things that we say that we're getting? And it's not even just a business issue, it's also a government issue as we're talking about the things we need from them. So I suppose that's challenge 1, is do we get the things that we actually are saying we're getting? I suppose challenge 2 was all of the trade-offs we're facing. Are there any other challenges that we think are going to be particularly prevalent as we work towards mitigation, but then also maybe resilience, adaptation as well? Any more challenges to throw into the mix?
Yeah, I would say that we are very much reliant on the will of others to change their behaviour. Behaviour change is absolutely crucial. We can only do so much to support through policy. But I think it's actually asking people to change what they're doing. Modal shift is absolutely imperative. We can't just rely upon electrification of transport to solve or reduce emissions from the transport sector. Modal shift is key, but we need to we're completely dependent on people actually wanting to ditch the car, walk, get on public transport. But also in some areas, that's going to be absolutely impossible. Where I live, we have one train station in the whole local authority, and that's 7 miles away from my house. And if I wanted to get to work, it would take me 4.5 hours. So I drive. And I think this is the difficulty that we're going to be facing, where modal shift is going to be imperative. That can really only be achieved in city centre town locations, not in rural areas. And we've got some outcrops, particularly if you're looking in sort of Cornwall and some of our rural areas where the connection for public transport is really quite fragmented. But then I think one key challenge is going to be the cost of living crisis and how that could actually impact upon people's ability to afford to change, particularly reducing the ability of people being able to afford EVs, the upfront costs, let alone to be able to actually charge them at home. And this is coupled with, if we want people to improve the energy efficiency of their homes, they might not have the surplus funds to actually afford to be able to do so. So I think the cost of living crisis will actually probably impede upon people's ability to do what they want to do, particularly those that are very keen to help. And in terms of the resilience sphere, I think we need to be very conscious that what we're implementing to decarbonize and address climate change mitigation doesn't increase our exposure to risk. And I say that whereby electrification of transport is seen as, I suppose, the golden solution at the moment to reducing emissions from that sector. However, as I highlighted earlier, during a really bad storm, I couldn't charge my car for 3 days. Now, if we ask everybody to drive electric cars and we want to electrify our public transport through our railways and bus transportation, if we see an increased likelihood in these severe storms, lightning, high winds, we will probably experience more frequent power outages, particularly as our grid networks are so fragile. Thereby, we will likely be our ability to get around, and our connectivity and our supply chain accessibility will be impacted greatly as those particular failures cascade down the networks. So there are complexities here, and I think it's really crucial that what we're actually implementing to decarbonize should be viewed with a climate risk lens, and that we actually address resilience at the same time to ensure that it's not a siloed approach.
Absolutely. And Andy, did you have another challenge you want to throw into the mix?
Well, I touched on a point from earlier, actually. I think one of the biggest challenges as a societal ones, we've got to face reduction. I know we love growth, everything has got to be about growth, but I love Bob the Builder, and he had it right. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Number one priority should always be reduce, and it's been a common theme through the conversation we've had this morning. Let's reduce the demand for peat. Why do we still need to dig virgin peat out of heat? Why do we need to have buildings which leak? Why do we need vehicles that burn X amount of energy? Reduction is the key. But again, the benefit of the reduction, especially with regards to the economic element of sustainability, should be clearly visible to everybody. By improving the built environment, we'll see a reduction in the energy that we need. By reducing the amount of water that we use, we'll see a reduction in carbon, and we'll see a reduction in costs. We've got to accept the fact that there needs to be reduction, not changing the mobile phone every time a new version of an iPhone is brought out, or another popular brand. There are others, or even our approach to IT, using recycled and repurposed equipment, rather than just saying, oh, we've run through its economic cycle in our accounting, now we can just get rid of it and upgrade and get something else. We've got to go back to fix and make do mentality. We've got to accept the reduction is key. And I think that will be one of the biggest challenges, because that goes against our passion for growth. But we can grow in other areas. We can be employed in other areas. It doesn't necessarily have to be working in a mobile phone shop selling mobile phones or the technology. There are other industries and approaches that we can develop into. But it's something that I think is absolutely probably one of the biggest changes people will have to face. Reduction in how far they travel all the time, the amount of time they're traveling, what they actually spend. It's got to happen.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. There's so many big changes to mentality and thinking that we're going to need to work our way through this. And I think it's a really strong example of the ways that the way we think about things are creating more problems for us. I do want to pick up some more on that issue that Hayley mentioned of risk, because I know it's something we've all talked around a little bit today, and I think it would do an injustice to the conversation not to talk a little bit more about these systemic risk vulnerabilities, not just the ones that are created by climate change, but like Hayley says, potentially are being embedded in an inconsiderate response. So what actions can we take to account for those risks associated with climate change while also addressing their causes? And we could start with you again, Hayley, because I know you'll have an interesting answer.
Yeah, climate risk is something that keeps me awake at night. I do feel a lot of the time that I'm living in the film Don't Look Up, because I'm constantly, trying to voice this real issue, this existential threat that we're facing, but no one really does seem to be listening. And I think it's imperative, really, that we seek to not deliver decarbonisation through a sort of project management approach, whereas we're sort of delivering the task that is in front of us, but we're not understanding the bigger picture. And I think resilience and risk needs to be embedded as part of that bigger picture. I think local authorities, large companies, industry needs to consider climate change risk assessments being conducted in all that we do. Across our transport sector, we need a large scale risk assessment, but this needs to be addressed on the region by region basis, because of the microclimates and geographic influences that will be at play in terms of how much we are exposed to particular climate risks. What we're facing up in Scotland and the impacts that are likely on their transport network, for instance, will be very different from what we're facing down south. But that being said, we still need to ensure that those particular risks are captured, but then not just leave it there. Understanding the risks is one thing, but actually having real tangible, robust policies in place to ensure that we are mitigating those risks is absolutely fundamental. There's been studies within the particular climate change risk assessment that the Committee on Climate Change released last summer. They indicated that in Wales, for instance, 500 miles of railway track is at significant risk of coastal flooding. But we have coastal management policies that have a hold the line approach out for the next 100 years. So we kind of look at the two things side and side and saying, well, you're saying it's at significant risk of coastal flooding, but then you're saying hold the line is going to be sufficient. And I think we need to just go back to the drawing board on a lot of these areas and actually look at what the risks are and see whether our policies that we have in place are going to be sufficient to address it. And then lastly, I think addressing cascading failures and ensuring that what we are delivering to address mitigation and decarbonisation, again, doesn't leave ourselves exposed. When we are installing EV charging points in car parks, have we considered installing battery storage? Are we looking at installing microgrid renewables in those particular areas so that actually those charging points are self-sufficient? I did see somebody sent me a link this morning in the Gower Peninsula. They've installed EV charging points, but with solar grid technology to ensure that actually 100% of the energy that are being supplied within those chargers is renewable. That's the way forward. But also, I think when we're going to look at these bigger solutions, there's a big push at the moment. So when you're looking at hydrogen, obviously green hydrogen is the way forward because we're not extracting hydrogen from natural gas. So the carbon that's associated with the fossil fuel element isn't being emitted. But with green hydrogen, that requires vast quantities of fresh water. As we start to experience warmer temperatures, particularly in the summer, and we are going to be faced with increased prevalence of drought, do we want to be using vast quantities of fresh water to produce a hydrogen through electrolysis when we probably need it just to keep ourselves alive? So I think there's some real big issues here that really does need to be unpicked. And I just don't feel confident at the moment that we're quite there, particularly with the processes and policy that we have in place.
Absolutely. Well, any more perspectives on risk and resilience? I know it's definitely one of those thorny issues that touches into everything. Andy, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just quickly agree with all the points made. I think the thing that always startles me is that we have this disjointed view of say a transport feature. Talk about a railway line. You know, we need transport to get there. Frequently multimodal. We may need parking or cycle lanes, but when you actually look at it, are we actually getting a level playing field with our climate change risk assessment? Are we also, are we saying when we evaluate each element that we need to have a functioning transport system in the face of climate change? But for example, the car park is designed to a 1 in 1,000 year event, that the railway line is designed to a 1 in 1,000 year event, that the energy requirement is also the same requirement, or we're building it to a 1 in 100 event or a 1 in 1,000 event. We've got to make sure that when we've got this connectivity between different elements, whether it's a cycle path, a car park, a bus lane, a road, a railway, that we're evaluating it against the same risks, whether it's flooding or whether it's and the intensity and the frequency of that. Otherwise, we're going to end up with one part of it that will work and the rest of it won't. It will just fall over. I think climate change risk is essential. We're starting to talk now about addressing embodied carbon and Part Z as a building, under the building regulations. But we must consider the climate change resilience of what we build. I think it's shocking that when we talk about the 300,000 homes, 2050, 26 million of the homes we live in today will still be in existence. How many of those are resilient to climate change? And I think that part of the challenge is addressing the fragmented way that the industry works, but also the fact that we have issues around insurance. If there isn't a climate change event, the insurance will quite often just replace like for like rather than actually improve what was there to make it climate change resilient. Why? Because they know that the market is fickle and that the following year they may well not be with insurance company A, but have moved across to insurance company B. So we need to find a way to actually overcome some of those barriers and challenges to actually make sure that when we do then enhance the built environment after a climate change event, whether it be flooding, whether it be through wildfire, whether it be through subsidence, that we actually put it back better so it is more resilient for the future. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges we face. Otherwise, our drives for carbon reduction, our drives for circularity, it's all meaningless. The most sustainable building is the one that's already been built. We just try to repurpose it and reuse it. And I don't think at the moment we've quite got to that point with regards to our infrastructure and our buildings. We're not making them climate change resilient. We're not learning when we have these events. We're not improving, apart from maybe the external protection or the engineering solutions. But we need to do it a unit by unit basis, as well as putting the larger pieces in place.
Can I just come in there? One key thing that we could look to try and explore, and through my work, there just doesn't seem to be enough real life examples of it, is nature-based solutions that offer those significant co-benefits through biodiversity provision and carbon sequestration. There's really simple techniques such as green roofs that can lead to quite substantial cooling of buildings, whereby at the moment this just seems to be the standard approach. Oh, we'll implement aircon. Well, air conditioning will create a cooler building, yes, but it releases fugitive emissions and it uses electricity to power it. Why don't you consider a green roof? And it's a very low cost but high impact way of trying to actually work with nature to try and support us on this agenda. Similarly, if you're looking at flooding risk, for instance, it's looking towards nature to see if we can actually work with it to try and minimize a risk. Such schemes such as flood attenuation ponds, riparian woodlands, all offer ways in which we can actually utilize and work with biodiversity and our natural capital to try and reduce our exposure to risk without relying upon hard engineering, which is often carbon intensive through their very nature and construction, and expensive too. So yeah, I think there needs to be quite a substantial push forward by looking at how we can implement nature-based solutions in the wider sphere of what we do, I suppose.
Absolutely, and I'd like to take that opportunity to bring Mark in, because I think you're absolutely right, Hayley, that we do think about resilience a lot in terms of the things that we build or construct, but we maybe aren't using the opportunity to think about the ways that nature can help us give us some resilience. And Mark, I know you already talked a little bit about soil's role in that, but I wonder if you could share any more thoughts you have about risk and resilience in the natural world.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm part of a big team of people looking at resilience in the natural world. At the moment, we're going across many grasslands and woodlands in the UK to understand this thing called resilience and how we can improve resilience and how we can make it recover, and understanding connectivity of systems. So from the microbiology to the bats, to soundscapes, to lots of really interesting things, looking at conductivity, because that's one thing is actually understanding what the natural system, the resilience of natural systems, but also how we can make them recover. This is obviously a complex question in terms of, I'm not talking about built environments here, I'm talking about ecological systems. So what we always have to consider is that systems change. So where do we start? Where is the starting point that we're going to consider it from? Sometimes trying to restore a natural system actually, it's just not going to happen anyway. So we have to think out of the box in that respect. How can we understand systems to improve them? So if we say we're improving them so that it's better than before, but what does better mean? And these kind of philosophical questions are actually really quite important in respect of restoring systems and climate change and connectivity on an ecological level. I agree with everything that Andrew and Hayley was saying, but I'm specifically looking at, rather than urban environments, natural environments.
Absolutely. I think it's good that we all have a relatively strong degree of agreement on all of these things. What perhaps I'd leave us with then as a final question is, we are all environmental professionals and we represent quite a wide range of different backgrounds, not just in terms of specialisms, but also in terms of academia, consultancy, sort of devolved governmental policy, and then NGO. What can we as environmental professionals be doing while all of this is going on in the background to help achieve this? I'll
jump in quick. I think one's lead by example. I think we need to definitely walk the talk ourselves. And I think from my perspective, it's keeping hold of that bigger picture. I think Hayley raised an interesting point, and I might do as well. Let's take a green roof. We know from CPCM 36 that buildings are going to overheat as the climate increases. The green roof is a solution. It helps with regards to that. It helps with regards to, it has a soil substrate. It gives us biodiversity. It's another bucket we can put in the hydrological system. It helps with air quality and air pollution. Let's try and look for the added value and join those dots across when we have the conversation, so we're not always tunnel visioned with just carbon or with climate change. There's lots of other benefits from what we actually do, even providing food. With you put wild strawberries in an area of a green wall, for example. So I think it's trying to highlight to people the joining of those dots, the additional benefits you can get from protecting the soils. You can get the biodiversity, the sequestered carbon, the nutrient neutrality, the nutrient cycling, how that can help, the health of the microbes, the importance that has with waste management, and the fact that you never know, one day we may well use them and need them. We forget that many of our medicines, aspirin from willow, Taxol from yew trees, digitalis from foxgloves for hearts, a lot of what we might well need comes from biodiversity and comes from the world around us. So there's lots of benefits beyond that carbon and climate change element that we should be always looking and considering. And as I say, let's try to work with nature rather than against it constantly, because it's done a wonderful job of regulating floods and controlling temperature build-up in areas. We just need to learn a little bit from the world around us and keep our eyes open to it.
Absolutely right.
We need more professionals. We need more training courses. We need to support graduates coming out of university who want to work in this field. Often they have the qualification but not the experience. Large companies should use us. We have vast amounts of experience. We can support you utilize a strategic approach rather than an arbitrary approach to address whatever climate emergency pledges they have made. We are absolutely vital to support in terms of assessing carbon that is being emitted by activities and processes, but also by identifying and delivering the solutions that are needed rather than going down the let's plant trees route. We are absolutely crucial. And with regards to greenwashing, I just wanted to just leave a final point. I think that the government really needs to develop more robust policy to address greenwashing. Greenwashers need to be called out, and I think more draconian measures need to be implemented to address this, because relating to what Andrew said earlier, we need to reduce, and offsets isn't the way forward and should be the absolute last resort.
Mark, you want to hop in?
Yeah, just a quick hop in. So I absolutely agree with Hayley in the respect of education. Of course, I work at Cranfield University. So, for me, it's always the idea that thinking about the ecological system in terms of money, carbon, in terms of money, biodiversity, it shouldn't be. If we don't look after it, we're gonna, as a human race, are we gonna be here in, you know, how much food do we have left? You know, we have to think in terms of longevity, and actually not just longevity of the human race in terms of food, but actually our quality. It's the quality of life for us and for other species on this planet. If we don't think ahead of the game, then we know where it's going.
And if perhaps any of our viewers who've made it to this point in the video have their own perspectives on what environmental professionals can be doing, you can leave your thoughts in the comment section below. But for now, that's all we have time for. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut the conversation short there. Let's finish up with some final thoughts from each of the panelists. So Mark, we'll stick with you for the time being. What's your final takeaway from the conversation?
Faster action has to be, the government needs to think out of the box and take action now. Otherwise, we're going to have so many problems that we won't be able to mitigate and solve our problems. It's for our future generations.
Thank you, Mark. And over to you, Andy. What's your final takeaway for today?
Time's short. We've got to act now, and I think we can act not only in our behaviour and our options and choices that we make, but by influencing those around us in everything that we do. I think it's essential. Quite incredible with regards to the amount of greenwash that's actually out there. I would encourage everybody just to always have an open mind, think beyond the U-bend, use the tools that we have available, whether it's life cycle assessment, right the way through to energy assessments. We need to have a balanced approach to it. And again, never lose sight of the fact that there are other impacts and issues. You know, we need to balance the nuclear waste storage long term, for example, against the carbon savings that could have. We need that full 360 view so we don't make wrong decisions.
Thank you, Andy. And finishing with you, Hayley, what's your final takeaway from today's discussion?
Yeah, I agree with Andrew. Actually, we need more urgent action. We need more investment, and we need to be taking a bigger picture approach when we're looking at decarbonisation. We need to consider resilience in all that we do, but also those potential trade-offs that could result from the implementation of a solution that is seeking to address emissions. Are there any ecological trade-offs, and are there any social trade-offs? So we need to be looking at the whole picture in the round rather than addressing one particular part of the puzzle.
Thank you, Hayley, and thank you all again for participating in today's expert discussion on climate change. This is one of two paired discussions bringing different perspectives from different experts. So if you've enjoyed watching this discussion, check out the other discussion on our YouTube channel, where you'll also be able to find all sorts of other content, not just on climate change, but on topics across the environmental sciences. If you found this discussion interesting, you can show your support for the IES by becoming an affiliate, or if you're a professional in the environmental sector working with science, consider becoming a member of the IES. In the details below, you'll find a link to our social media and the IES website. Make sure you follow us across platforms so that you're up to date with all our latest events, videos, and CPD opportunities. And remember to like the video, share it with your friends and colleagues, and let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you again to our expert panel for providing us with such great reflections on the IPCC reports and climate change over the last 6 months. It's always fantastic to be able to draw on such a deep expertise from within the IES membership, and I'll look forward to welcoming each of you to discussions again in the future. But for now, thank you for participating. Thank you to the audience for watching, and we'll see you again soon.